can you keep a fish tank without water circulation and without surface agitation? Well, much of the fish keeping literature and quite a lot of us in the hobby will probably say that this is not a good idea, because you need to have some sort of a movement, water movement in your fish tank, so that the beneficial bacteria spread around nutrients for plants, and that there's no dead areas for fish, and overall you need to have also some sort of a surface agitation in order to produce oxygen for the fish to breathe. And it's generally not advisable to keep fish in a completely stagnant water where there is no water movement, no water circulation and no surface agitation. Well, this fish tank was a bit of an experiment for me, and this is basically a system that has almost no water circulation. So this is a stagnant water. The idea was to imitate a swamp, and this is what you would see in quite a lot of natural habitats, swampy habitats, in swamps, when you have this completely stagnant body of water where nothing is moving. Well, there is occasional ripple of wind that might cause some surface agitation on the top of that water body, but in a lot of swampy areas the surface will be covered with a thick layer of aquatic surface plants, so they will not allow any sort of surface agitation. A lot of fish live in this kind of conditions, and a lot of fish that we keep in our hobbies actually originate from swamps and from stagnant bodies of water. So this fish tank was in a way an effort to imitate something like that. I wasn't sure whether this system will function without any water circulation or without any surface agitation, but it's been approximately 2 months after I set up the system, and it seems to be thriving. So for those of you not familiar with this fish tank, this is a Riparium system. It's a 140-liter Riparium system with lots of riparian plants growing outside of fish tank. There's a variety of plants. You can see previous videos where I talk about the plants and the fish living in this fish tank, so I'm not going to dwell on these topics again. So basically the only piece of filtering equipment on this fish tank is this Eheim 250 Eco filter, and it doesn't actually produce any surface agitation because it's an outflow pipe, and it's here. It goes on top of a bogwood. I'll show you that bogwood in a moment. It's this bogwood here. It's actually outside of water, and it's fully covered with sphagnum moss, and in lower areas it's covered with java moss and riccia moss. All of this grows outside of water, and you can see here water flowing from the outflow pipe. So basically the water flows through the driftwood, and it drops down this kind of a coastal area made up of this bogwood and completely covered by sphagnum moss, riccia moss and java moss as well. And water flows from here basically, and flows through the moss and into the fish tank. But as you can see here, that's where the water drops into the fish tank. It doesn't create any surface agitation at all, so there is literally, you can't even see this water flowing down into the tank. Well, this is because it basically flows through the moss, and moss prevents any sort of water flow or water circulation happening. The other half of this tank, I'll try to show it to you here, is fully covered with a layer of all sorts of surface plants. There's some water lettuce in here, there's lots of duckweed in here, and this is riccia moss, and there's also lots of java moss, the Brazilian moss, growing outside of water, kind of immersed style areas of water lettuce. So it's an imitation of a swamp basically. There's lots of things also happening underneath. We'll try to, there's a bit of a reflection. There's no other way of doing that. Yes, so There's absolutely no water circulation or surface agitation in this area too. It's a completely stagnant environment. There's literally nothing is moving here. Obviously surface plants, they love this sort of environment and they prosper and thrive in these conditions. But what about the fish? My main concern with the fish was that they will simply not have enough oxygen because nothing is agitating the surface, so there is no oxygen being produced in this system, and obviously most likely they should be expected to gulp air at the surface, they should be expected to breathe heavily, they should be expected to have lack of oxygen, but none of this actually happens. There will be some footage here of fish living in this tank close up, so you would be able to see that they breathe normally, they're absolutely healthy. And my corridors here, I have corridors duplicareus in here, they actually breathe quite regularly. I don't have any eggs on the glass right now, but normally every week they lay eggs on the glass. And other fish also seem to be behaving normally. They're active, they're chasing each other, and they're feeding normally. There will be a feeding video a moment later. So the fish are healthy, water parameters are perfect, there is literally zero nitrites and zero nitrates, and definitely no ammonia, and everything else is in norm. So there's no adverse effect on water parameters, and fish definitely do not seem to be affected by this lack of surface agitation. The same goes for water circulation. Basically, in that area of the tank where there is a inflow pipe of the canister, it clearly sucks the water in, it takes the water into the canister, so there is probably some water movement in that area, but it's very gentle and very modest. In this part of the tank, basically in much of the tank, there's literally no water movement at all. Everything is just completely stagnant. Nevertheless, there doesn't seem to be any negative effect on fish, and I have corridors here, so they move around the bottom of the tank, they move sinks on the bottom of the tank, so apparently they create some sort of a circulation on the bottom of the tank. Well, the first idea some of you might have is that you can actually keep fish without any surface agitation, which means that you don't really need to have an air stone, you don't need to have some sort of a filter that produces water movement on the top, or you don't need to have any sort of flow on the top which will generate oxygen. Partly this is true, but I believe the reason why there is enough oxygen in a water column is because of all these plants. What we know about plants, it doesn't matter whether we talk about aquatic plants or terrestrial plants, is that they always push oxygen to their roots. So if you keep, for example, aquatic plants planted in substrate, these plants will be pushing oxygen from the water column into the substrate to provide oxygen to their root systems. The same happens with terrestrial plants. For example, plants that we grow in pots, they push oxygen into soil to provide to oxygenate their roots actually. The same, I believe, happens with riparian plants growing with their roots in water. So all of these riparian plants that I have here, they certainly remove oxygen from air and they push it toward their roots, and their roots are in the water, so it's likely that they oxygenate their roots with air which they draw from surface, from air from outside, and they supply this oxygen down there. So they provide oxygen not only to their roots but also to everything that lives under the water. So that's why most likely my fish here have lots of oxygen, and that's why they're not suffering from oxygen depletion. They're not gulping air at the surface, they're not breathing heavily, because all of this enormous mass of riparian plants, they certainly provide enough oxygen. Also, I have quite a lot of, as I shown you previously, surface plants. So these surface plants are also heavy oxygen providers, and they're likely to provide also lots of oxygen to the fish. So as long as you have enough plants, either aquatic plants or riparian plants, it is likely that you can have a system without surface agitation, and that your fish can actually thrive without any surface movement or without any water circulation, which is the case with this fish tank here. And I believe that probably something like that happens in the wild, in nature, in swamps, which also have lots of surface plants, and very often lots of riparian plants on the banks of swamps, on coastal areas of these swampy reservoirs of water. So there are always plants that push oxygen from their leaves and their stems towards their roots, and that's how they supply water column with oxygen. Clearly I have lots of riparian plants in here, and these are huge and powerful plants. So they have strong root systems. You can see here root systems of pothos plants and monstera plants, and it's difficult for me to show you root systems of other riparian plants because they're kind of deep inside, but they also have powerful roots. For example, these are peace lily plants, spathiphyllum plants, and they're enormous. They're nearly 3 feet tall, and yeah, some of them actually grow up to this area. So these are huge plants. They also have massive root systems in the back of the tank, and they clearly supply these root systems with oxygen. So that's why there's likely to be lots of oxygen in this system, and that's why it is likely to thrive without any additional surface agitation. So to summarize, if you thought whether you can actually keep a fish tank without surface agitation, with a truly stagnant water and without water circulation, my answer is that most likely you can, as long as you have enough plants, either aquatic plants or riparian plants, and these plants will supply oxygen to the water column when they provide their own roots with oxygen. So that is likely to provide lots of oxygen for your fish, and it will keep your system healthy and functionable. If you don't have a lot of plants, either surface plants or aquatic plants or riparian plants, obviously there will be lack of oxygen in your system without surface agitation. The only way oxygen will be produced otherwise is through surface agitation, through all the bubbles that your air stone produces, or through all the water movement produced by your canister filters or other types of filter. So if this doesn't happen in your system, your fish will be deprived of oxygen. So there's really two ways to provide fish with oxygen. First is through surface agitation. Second, through lots of plants which will be supplying oxygen to the water column. And I believe this is the case with my system. So probably if I didn't have all these riparian plants and or any surface agitation, my fish will be suffering from the lack of oxygen. I hope this video was useful, and I hope it has provided at least some of the answers to questions you might have had throughout your hobby, but you could never experiment with this. Like most of us obviously will not experiment with our fish, and this was not necessarily an experiment but an effort to see whether the system will work. And obviously if I've seen that my fish are suffering from oxygen depletion, I would have added an air stone, or I would have added another canister to create surface agitation. But I've kept a close eye on this fish. I've watched them every day, several hours in fact, on a daily basis, and I could see that they're healthy and they're thriving, and that's why I believe that this system functions well, and that's why I can talk about the lessons that we can draw from this particular system. Of course, none of this is scientific, and none of this is based on any actual scientific evidence. It's more of an anecdotal evidence, but nevertheless it shows that something like that can function. Alright, so don't forget to subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet, and I will be making more hopefully educational videos in real future, and I will see you soon.